Hi again then guys, and welcome to the third installment of Pick of the Pack, the series where we cut through all the unnecessary duplicates of certain street cars like NSXs, MX-5s, RX-7s, and of course the ongoing joke that is the Skyline. But the Skyline has so many variants that we're going to split that one up into actual generations. It's that ridiculous. This one though is a very respected car, as many of the ones in this series are, but nonetheless has way too many versions. So which ones are actually worth buying, and which ones are maybe essential purchases even, because some of them I would say perhaps are. And the car in question is of course the Honda NSX. Now this is the only episode in this entire series where we are actually going to discuss cars from two manufacturers, because usually we do not discuss race cars or aftermarket versions. That is still the case, we're not. However, it is important to note that unlike many of the others in this series, the NSX is available in its pure form from two manufacturers, Honda and Acura. So we are going to be including those three Acura models in this mix as well, because they're very interesting in terms of how they compare. Also sometimes actually filling in gaps in the model year of the Honda versions. So, without any further ado, pomp and ceremony, let's get into it. First up then we have the OG, the 1990 Honda NSX. Now this is not the cheapest of all of the NSXs, but it is the cheapest of all of the Hondas at 80 grand. As far as the PP level, it's pretty good. It's actually the same as both the 93 and 95 models. The engine size is smaller, as with again the 95, 93 and 92s, and also the 91 Acura model with a 3 litre instead of the 3.2 that it later became. As far as power and torque and weight, it's pretty good. It's not the absolute lightest, but it's on par with the next couple of years. The Type R is a lot lighter, as you'd assume, but we'll get to that in a second. Overall, this initial model year is, I would say, interesting, because it's not necessarily the best in any particular way apart from price as far as the Hondas go, but it is very significant even though it's not the best in any of the other ways, purely because it was the first. This is the oldest NSX in the game, so of course, being the original, it's a great collector's piece. Next up now, moving very rapidly over to Acura with the 1991 model year, we now have their version of the NSX, a very notable car because, among other things, it's a full premium. That is a huge advantage to this car's name. So apart from that, how does it compare? Well, I mentioned just now that the Honda version from 1990 is the cheapest of the Hondas, but that it wasn't cheapest overall, and that's because this one is. This is 30 credits cheaper than the Honda, making it exactly 80 grand and the cheapest of all of the NSXs. That is definitely something to bear in mind, because getting a premium for less than all of the others, that's a pretty good deal, or at least potentially it could be. Now the engine on this one is a 3 litre, as you can see. The power though is not that great. In fact, it's the least powerful of them all, which kind of explains why it's a little bit cheaper. The torque is also the lowest of them all. The weight is a little bit higher, but not too bad. Of course the horsepower per tonne's not quite as good, but the PP level, because of being a premium and being allowed to have a flat floor, is actually higher than the Honda, and it's also similarly high to the next model, which we're going to discuss, which is pretty good, because the model which we're discussing now, next that is a much higher model. And that model is the 1992 Honda NSX Type R, or shorthand, the NSXR. This is such an undervalued car in the world of Gran Turismo, because you'd assume that people would use it a lot, because it's the top of the tree of the first generation. But it's not used all that much, from what I've seen. In fact, I don't see many people using these older NSXs that much at all, because the obvious choice is, of course, the newest one, the 2002 Premium, for every obvious reason in the book. This one, though, is a good car, and having driven all of them for this series, I can safely say it's by far the best of this first generation. It's not even close. The handling is so much better. And even though it doesn't have a flat floor and it's not a premium, it can easily give even that premium legendary newer Type R model a great run for its money. As far as pricing and that kind of stuff, it's a lot more expensive than any of the NSXs until 1997, so a pretty steep price. It's 97 grand, but at the same time it is lighter. In fact, it is the lightest NSX in the game, which is pretty cool. And also the power is upped a tiny bit, the torque is upped a tiny bit, and the PP level is the highest so far. Even higher than, as I alluded to just now, the Acura version has, with a flat floor. That's pretty good. Next though, we move to 1993, and things get much more conventional. This is essentially just another variation of the 1990 car. In fact, it's literally the same in every way, but more expensive. In short, this car is entirely unnecessary. You can buy this one if you want to, but it's really pointless. That's all that needs to be said, so let's move on. Next up, keeping it in the Honda brand specifically, we skip to 1995. Interestingly, no 1994 models in the game. This one once again has a bit of a price jump, not that much over the 93, but about 4.5 grand over the original, and it's the same again. It's literally the same car as 1993 and 1990 in terms of on-paper numbers. Now, the way that they drive, the way that they handle specifically does change a little bit. This one starts to get a bit tighter, a bit more focused, a bit better around corners, but the original isn't exactly bad. So for the sake of paying a little bit more for the same car, whether or not that really feels necessary, well, that'll of course have to be down to you. For me personally, don't bother. It's a pointless car. Next up now we move into 1997, and there are 3 Honda NSXs from 1997 and 1 Acura model, and of course you can see them all listed on screen now. And the way that they compare is fairly interesting, because the Honda versions vary quite a bit in price. The Type S is over 100 grand. In fact, it's the first NSX of the bunch to be over 100 grand, so you'd safely assume it's going to be pretty good. And these are also the first NSXs to jump up to a 3.2 litre instead of a 3 litre, and the associated improvements which you'd hope would be there are: they have more torque, more power, the weight is similar, they still weigh 1110 kilos, but once again the Acura is heavier, which seems to be a running theme here, and the horsepower per tonne is once again a little bit better. Unless it's the Acura, again. So ultimately I would say that this generation of the Acura version definitely doesn't have the premium advantage, or the price advantage, or really any advantage, of the 1991 Acura model. So you can completely give the Acura a miss, unless of course you specifically want to check out that model. And as far as the specific Honda models go, I would, funnily enough, actually recommend getting the standard 1997 NSX if you have to buy one of them, because the Type S isn't quite as strong overall, because it's a lot more expensive. As I said, the first NSX so far to break 100 grand, and there's really not much reason for it to do so, and the Type S Zero just feels kind of unnecessary. It's not as powerful, the torque isn't as good, and it is lighter, which is notable, but again, it just doesn't feel all that necessary. The horsepower per tonne is better, that has to be noted, but you could go for the Type S Zero or for the standard NSX. I'll leave it up to you, of course, but the standard NSX is cheaper. And so overall, I think that all of these 1997 cars feel, once again, a little bit pointless. I would recommend just skipping them over, but if you have to buy one, it should be either the standard or the Type S Zero. Moving on now to 1999, we once again have 3 different Hondas, but this time no Acura, and they are the NSX in standard form, the Type S, and the Type S Zero. Once again, the prices are very similar, they all get a little bit of a bump. Well, in fact the S0 doesn't, it's the exact same price, for good reason, because it's the exact same car basically. And once again, I have to say that the verdict is the same. They're literally the same as the previous year. The specs are the same, just the price is more. Does the handling get a little bit better? Perhaps. Does the PP get slightly higher here or there? Yeah, perhaps. But again, I would just totally give 97 a miss, and 99 a miss, because they're just totally unnecessary cars. The handling is a little bit better with each new year, but it just doesn't feel necessary. You might as well go for the Type R, because that's light years ahead of them all so far. Next up then we move into the new generation, 2001. And this is where it really starts to get interesting, because now we've got the facelifted NSX, and this is where we start to get more alternative models, like the concept version and later on the Type R. So what kind of interesting differences could we expect now? Well, you get the same size engine, as you'd assume, but now the power is upped. And here's where it gets really cool, because even though the 2002 Type R is the one that everyone goes for, because it is great, that one is not as powerful as these. It's actually got 1 horsepower less. These, in both NSX and Type S form, are the most powerful of them all, with 485 horsepower, and alongside the 2002 model, which we'll discuss in a second, they do have the most torque, 344 pound-feet. As far as weight, they're not even close though to the Type R. The closest is the Type R Concept, which weighs 5 kilos more, but it's also a 130 grand machine, which kind of negates that advantage. The Type R Concept is certainly a standout. It is one to check out, but that one doesn't have quite as good power. So again, it kind of trades places here and there with the others. The Concept is a standout though, I will say that. Regardless of how good or bad it is a standout for the exact same reason as the original 1990 version, and that is, it's the first of its kind. The original 1990 was the first NSX, and this is the harbinger of the facelift. So yeah, it has some appeal. Is it essential? No, definitely not, especially given that it's by far the most expensive of all the NSXs. So it's much more of a specific collector's piece, for sure. And now moving on to, not finally, but finally for Honda, we have of course the one which everyone goes for, by far my most used NSX, and the one which I would, surprise surprise but not really, recommend overall. The 2002 NSXR, or the NSX Type R, 120 grand or just under, gets you the highest PP level of them all, thanks to a flat floor at 579, which incidentally is still a fantastic PP level. This car is supremely capable and very, very effective at that level, or even lower without the flat floor, more so actually at that level. This is a car which I'm surprised more people don't say is OP, because in terms of how good it is borderline OP, if not over the line. It's that good. In fact, this car around somewhere like the Nordschleife can genuinely embarrass racing cars with more power, more often than not. This can take on GT cars, not necessarily in their fully tuned form, but it can certainly take on GT cars with, say, 200 or 300 horsepower more, and still bring the fight to them. Plus, this one can do around 235 miles per hour on its own, around Route X, without NOS or slipstream. That's fast. For a car with well under 500 horsepower, that's real fast. But also, of course, being a Type R, it's light. Not quite as light as the 92 Type R, but light nonetheless. 1,039 kilos is good. The horsepower per ton is the best of them all, 466. And so overall, this is definitely the one to go for, just like the premium S2000 is. So finally then, that brings us to the one which is very easy to overlook, but actually is significant, because it's the newest generation of this original NSX in the game. And that version is this one, the 2004 Acura NSX. 2 whole years newer than the most popular one, the 2002 Type R. So what significance does this car have, or is it just newer? Well, probably not too surprisingly, yeah, it's just newer. It shares the same essential design as basically everything from 2001 onwards, but as all of the Acuras have been so far, it's not as good. The horsepower per ton is among the lowest of them all. In fact, it is the lowest of them all at 389. The weight is very high. The power is not that great. In fact, it's one of the lowest. The torque is not that great either. The PP level is really low, given how good it should be, and the price isn't all that good at 94 grand. So this car literally only has one advantage to its name, or one point of significance, and that is it happens to be the newest of the original NSX models in Gran Turismo 6. Of course, notwithstanding the much newer concept version, and there's no real need to have that one here at all. It's a totally different car. So overall, that means that this one is, again, completely unnecessary. So which ones are necessary? Because that's what you really want to know. Well, in summary, I would say that the most useful NSXs in terms of collector's appeal and usability are the original 1990 NSX, because it's where it all began, so that's got collector's appeal. The 1991 Acura, because it's the earliest premium that you can get, and that is a pretty good advantage, plus it's cheaper than all of them. And if I remember correctly, I think you can win that one, but I'm not certain there. I think you can, though. Then, the 1992 Type R, because it is severely undervalued and is one of the best of these models overall. In fact, I would say it's the second best overall, second best to the 2002. Then next up, I would just skip straight ahead to 2001 with the standard 2001 NSX, because it's the most powerful of them all. It's not as good as the Type R, but it's deceptively good, and it looks really nice. And then, of course, the 2002 Type R, because, duh, it's the best overall, of course. And so, overall, I hope you guys have enjoyed this breakdown. There's certainly way too many NSXs, and you can just completely avoid everything through 93, basically to 99. Just completely skip over all of those, because they're totally unnecessary. Any improvements which they have aren't all that noticeable on the track. So overall, that's it for this particular rundown. Of course, I'll see you guys next week for another one. We might begin on a Skyline model, I'm not sure yet. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.